Just a quick reminder before we get into the lesson to download the hands-on lab exercises that accompany this complete CCNA course. I'll include the link in the description. Also remember to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you don't miss any of the lessons in the course. Okay, let's get into it. In this lecture, you'll learn about HSRP, Cisco's Hot Spare Router Protocol. HSRP uses a virtual IP and MAC address to allow for automated gateway failover. So you see in the example here, we've got R1 and R2, which are going to be redundant default gateways for our PCs in the 10.10.10 subnet. R1 and R2 have both got interface Gigabit Ethernet 0/1 facing the PCs, and HSRP is configured at the interface level. R1 has got physical IP address 10.10.10.2 and R2 has got physical IP address 10.10.10.3. We configure a virtual IP address of 10.10.10.1 in the example. The two routers will negotiate for HSRP. One will become active and one will be the standby. The active router will be active for the virtual IP address of 10.10.10.1 and the associated virtual MAC address. They send keep alives to each other, both routers. If R2 stops receiving those hellos, it will realize that R1 has gone down and it will then take over ownership of the 10.10.10.1 virtual IP address and the MAC address. So on the PCs, we just configure them to use 10.10.10.1 as their default gateway. They're completely unaware about HSRP. It's transparent to them. As far as they're concerned, they just have one gateway at 10.10.10.1. They don't know that there's redundant gateways there. They don't know if there's a failover. And the failover all happens automatically. Both routers have a normal physical IP address and MAC address on their HSRP interface. Unique addresses are used for the physical addresses on both routers. If you wanted to check that, you could do a show interface on the interface. You'll see the IP address and the MAC address is going to be different on both. They both also have the HSRP virtual IP and MAC address configured on that interface. The same addresses are used on both routers here. When they come online, one is elected the HSRP active router, the other is the standby. So HSRP does not do load balancing for PCs that are in the same IP subnet. The active router owns the virtual IP and MAC address and responds to ARP requests coming from the PCs. So all traffic for the virtual IP address goes through the active router. The routers send hello messages to each other over their HSRP interface. So going back to our example, when we're sending those hello messages to each other as keep alives, when R1 sends it to R2, it uses 10.10.10.2 as the source address, 10.10.10.3 as the destination address, and vice versa for the hello packets coming from R2 to R1. And if the standby router stops receiving those hellos from the active, it realizes that it's gone down and it will transition to be the new active router. And it will then take ownership of the virtual IP and MAC address, and it will now respond to the ARP requests from the PCs. So looking at the configuration, it's very simple. On R1, for our example, we say interface Gigabit Ethernet 0/1. The physical IP address 10.10.10.2, 255.255.255.0, no shutdown, so that's just standard interface configuration. For HSRP, we just want to enter one additional command, which is standby 1 IP 10.10.10.1. HSRP uses the standby command. We do a matching configuration over on R2. It's also on interface gigabit Ethernet 0/1. Here the IP address is 10.10.10.3, no shutdown, and standby 1 IP 10.10.10.1. So a different physical IP address on both routers, the same standby address on both routers. So that is the configuration. To verify it, we do a show standby. I'll come out of full screen mode so I can highlight some of these entries that you see under the show standby command. So show standby will show what the virtual IP address is. You can see that the state is currently active. You can also see what the virtual MAC address is here as well. Remember, if you wanted to see the actual physical MAC address, you would do a show interface. The physical MAC and the virtual IP address are going to be different IP addresses. And here I can see I'm on R1. R1 is currently the active router. The standby router is R2 at 10.10.10.3. Okay, so that's the theory and the configuration and verification. Let's actually do the configuration in the lab. It's the same example that I used in the slides there. So let's jump on to R1 first. And if I do a show IP interface brief, you'll see that there's no configuration on the gigabit Ethernet 0/1 port yet. I've done the rest of the upstream configuration though. So I'll go to global config, and on interface gig 0/1, the physical IP address is 10.10.10.2 with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0 and no shut. So my standard interface configuration for HSRP, I say standby 1, and it was IP 10.10.10.1. So that's R1 configured. I need to do a matching configuration on R2. So I'll go to global config and interface gig 0/1. IP address is 10.10.10.3 here. So the physical IP addresses have to be different. A /24 subnet mask again, no shut, and then the same command for HSRP, which was standby instance 1 IP 10.10.10.1. So that's all my configuration done. It does take a little while for HSRP to come up to about a minute when you've got the default timers. So rather than waffling on for a minute, I will pause the video. Oh, I don't need to pause the video, it just came up. Okay, that was convenient. So let's go back to the enable prompt and do a show standby, and I can see that HSRP group 1 is active, and the active router is local, so it came up as active on R2. That's because the higher IP address will be preferred by default, and the standby router is R1 at 10.10.10.2. If I go on to one of my PCs, so I'll have to go to Packet Tracer for this, and I'll go on to PC1 and go to the desktop and open up a command prompt, and I can ping 10.10.10.1, and that is successful. And if I do an ARP-A to see the MAC address being used for the default gateway ends in AC01. Let's go back on to R2, and I can see that that is the HSRP MAC address. If I do a show interface gig 0/1, you'll see that the physical MAC address is different. Okay, so that was HSRP, how to do the configuration, how to verify it. See you in the next lecture where we'll cover some more advanced HSRP topics. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to get the complete course ad-free right now, then you can enroll in my CCNA Gold Bootcamp by clicking the link above my head or in the description. It also includes full study notes, quizzes, and 150 pages of additional troubleshooting labs you can't find anywhere else.